Good afternoon. You've got about 15 and a half hours before the marathon starts tomorrow. There's not really that much more physical preparation that you can put in between now and then. All the miles have been run, you've done all the training, the early mornings. There's not much more you can do. I think you've probably heard today some little last minute things you can do with nutrition, and some last minute things you can do from the physiotherapist there with making sure your muscles are ready. The icing on the cake, if you will, of your marathon journey. But what about up here? You spent all this time fine-tuning your body, but what about fine-tuning your mind to get the most out of your mindset on the day? Is there anything we can do to eke out the last few ounces of performance? Well, absolutely there is. Actually, if there wasn't, this would be a pretty short and boring presentation, so we're going to hope there is some stuff we can do. So with your indulgence, in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to go through 3 of my favourite ninja mindset strategies that are going to hopefully help you make the most of your marathon mindset tomorrow. But first of all, let me ask you a question here. It's a bit of audience participation. Put your hand in the air if you have followed some kind of training program for the Dublin Marathon. Give me a show of hands. Okay, well, I'm assuming that there's a few more of you that have put their hands up. Perhaps if you're not a hand putter upper, don't worry, I'm not going to judge you, but I will assume that most of you have followed some kind of schedule for the race. At some point then, in that case, most of us will have sat down and we will have planned how the next 4 months or so of preparation are going to pan out to make sure that we're a picture of marathon potential come race day tomorrow. So having spent and invested all that time preparing our bodies, doesn't it make sense to spend a little bit of time making sure that the last 4 hours of our journey, the race itself, go smoothly? We have some kind of a plan. Now, actually, just listening to Jerry do his talk earlier, very interesting, and I'm going to touch upon one of the things he mentioned, which was when one of his first marathons, he was aiming for 7:30 pace, and he went out at 6:30. Well, that obviously came back to bite him in the backside a little bit later on. But I want to take you back on a journey with me now to the 7th of June 2010. It's the Cork Marathon. And I'm stood in the start line, about 4 rows from the very front. I'm going for a sub-3 marathon. So, target time, know exactly what I want to do, I've done the preparation, it's all part of the plan. The gun goes off, and we're off. Now, I settle into my 6:45 per mile pace pretty quickly. And imagine my shock then as I'm jostled and barged out of the way with literally hundreds of other runners shooting past me. Now, 6:45 isn't quite elite standard, but it's not too shabby either. So this was a bit of a shock to me. I really had no idea that the Cork Marathon was such a magnet for marathon performance and elite runners. But hang on a second. What's this? A few miles down the road, and I'm starting to pick off these same runners by the dozen. Some of them actually starting to walk and limp along, stretching out cramped by the side of the road. Still with 23 miles to go, poor sods. So these guys either had no plan at all, or if they did have a plan, it was ill-conceived or just totally ignored on the day itself. And that just seems such a shame to me, to have wasted all that planning and preparation in the months leading up to the race, just to throw it up in the air and hope things come down right on the day. During the race, you may be a little bit faster than your training has been showing you. You may be a little bit slower. But it's not going to be far off what your recent performance in training has been showing you. Having a plan based upon your current performance puts you firmly in the driving seat. It gives you control on in the race itself. And this is probably one of the most important mindset things and motivational things that are out there. If you think also how much more motivating it is in the dying stages of the marathon to be overtaking runners instead of being constantly overtaken from mile 3 or 4 onwards. It's a much better feeling to be the overtaker, believe me. So that's our first strategy. Have some kind of a plan. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be anything more complicated than, you know, working out roughly what your target time is, and then seeing, well, if that's my target time, then by the time I get to that first mile marker, my watch should say about X, Y, and Z. By the time it gets to the second mile, it should be the same time again added on, and so on and so forth. If you're going out and you know you should be running about 7:30s, and you look down, you've done the first mile in 6:30, and that's a warning sign that it's time to perhaps slow things down a little bit. You get to mile 20 and there's some more in the tank, then that's the time you can start pushing yourself and working a little bit harder. But get the mindset right, plan right from the outset how those hours of the race are going to pan out. Now let's talk about elite marathon performers for a second, because those guys have got it pretty tough. You know, not only do they have to run a marathon, but they've got to do it with enormous amounts of pressure upon their shoulders. They've got to run, and they've got the expectations of maybe even the world looking at them, watching them run. There may be even financial consequences if they don't perform under these huge amounts of pressure. Now, for us, it's fine. There's no pressure at all for us, normal marathon runners, is there? We just got to turn up and enjoy ourselves and job's done. What kind of time we run is by the by. No pressure whatsoever, no consequences, no one really cares. We're just there to make up the numbers. Well, what a load of rubbish that is. Of course there's pressure on us to run. Of course there's pressure upon us to perform at some level. It may be different from elite performers, but there's still some kind of pressure. Whether that's pressure that we put on ourselves, or whether there's expectations of people we've told we're going to be running a certain time. There's still some element of pressure. So how are we going to cope with performing under pressure? Well, I'm going to borrow something from rugby for a second. Are there any rugby fans here today? Again, a couple. I assume we've got the non-hand raisers in the audience today as well. So, let's take a look at two of the greatest rugby ball kickers in the game today. Johnny Wilkinson, Ronan O'Gara. Okay, a bit more response to Ronan. Well, these two guys have something in common. First of all, both formidable ball kickers, place kickers, and players in general. But secondly, if you ever watch these guys when they're lining up to take a kick, it doesn't matter how much rests upon them getting that ball between the posts. It doesn't matter how much pressure there is, the enormity of the occasion. It doesn't matter how many millions of people are watching them around the world. The pressure may be incredible, but the focus these guys have as they place the ball, run up and take the strike, will be the same whether they're on the training ground or in the middle of an international tournament. So how do they perform under pressure so well? Well, the other thing that these guys have in common is they both have the same kicking coach. Johnny Wilkinson, Ronan O'Gara share a kicking coach, and the guy's name is Dave Allred. Now, I actually interviewed Dave about performing under pressure a little while back, and for me personally, it was one of the most influential conversations that I had about getting the best performance in a high pressure situation. And again, don't forget that pressure is whatever you heap on your shoulders. And what Dave said was that you can't focus on the performance to get the best out of your performance. You have to focus on the process. And that's what I want to talk to you about for my second strategy. Focus on the process itself. For running, the process of running seems fairly straightforward. You just put one foot in front of the other. But there's a lot of minutiae that go in to make up the perfect running form. You've got posture, you've got relaxed arms and shoulders, you've got a rhythmical, relaxed breathing, you've got the slight forward lean as you run. Has anybody done this? You know when you're running along and there's a race photographer coming up ahead, and you're running along like this and huffing and puffing, you see the race photographer and what happens? You're running like this and all of a sudden you're thinking about how you look as you run, right? I think we've all done that. If you run a race, and I don't care, you're all liars if you're not putting your hand up for that one. We've all done that. So we just need to try to bring this into the run the whole way through and perform focusing on the process. Now the strategy for doing that and making this something you can take and practically apply is to take the race mile by mile, and each mile focus on a different part of your technique. For example, the first mile, you might think about maintaining an upright posture. My personal favourite is to imagine a piece of string tied to the top of your head and lifting you up. And that will lengthen the spine and hold you in a pretty good alignment there. You have to concentrate on it. So really focus on your posture for the first mile. The second mile, let's relax the shoulders and really focus on the shoulders. Yeah, we want to try to keep the body upright still, but let's work on the shoulders now. The third mile, let's go to the breathing. The fourth mile, let's have a think about how we're leaning. The fifth mile, let's relax those ankles so they're nice and floppy. It doesn't matter what you do. Top performers will always give themselves instructional-based process cues to ensure that they are immersed in the process itself rather than overwhelmed by the enormity of the occasion. So take some time and think about what instructions you're going to give yourself tomorrow during the race. And these are things you can do straight away. You can start thinking about this now and put it into practice tomorrow. The third strategy is something that's perhaps not for everybody, but I promise you, if you give it a go, it is probably the most powerful. And if Frank had said to me today, George, there's been a bit of a mix-up, you've only got 5 minutes now instead of 20, you've got to change your talk somehow, then this is what I would have boiled it down to. Has anybody, again, I'm not going to ask you for a hand raise, I know what response I'm going to get. Has anybody thought about some aspect of the day? Maybe imagine what it's going to be like on the start line, or perhaps the weight of that medal hanging around your neck as you finish, or maybe even the cool refreshingness of that first victory pint slipping down your throat. I'm sure at some point over the last few days, we've all thought about something about race day. Well, all this strategy does, it just develops upon this same natural human instinct to imagine or to visualize. And I'm going to go through a visualization strategy in a second, but it's been proven time and again to be super effective and super easy to implement. A lot of top performers will be doing this, and they will put as much attention into preparing with visualization techniques as they will with their actual physical preparation. Now, a very brief bit of background just to add a bit of credibility to this if you need it. In 1969, an American plastic surgeon called Maxwell Maltz wrote a book called Psycho-Cybernetics. And in that book, he outlined some psychological processes and concepts that have actually become the forerunners for many modern-day psychology, including neuro-linguistic programming and sports psychology. And visualization was one of the central theses of his body of work. So visualization is a very, very powerful technique. And this structure I'm going to work through with you now in the next couple of minutes is something that I would encourage you to try both today and also tomorrow before the race itself starts. You need about 10 to 30 minutes of peace and quiet if you want to really make the most of this. And if you want to go back and have another look at this, my blog, intelligentrunning.com, I shot a video and put it up on the blog a few days ago, and it kind of outlines that. In fact, one of the comments I had about why this would be so challenging would be actually finding 10 to 30 minutes of peace and quiet. So if that's a challenge, then I can't really help you with that. But it is worth trying to find some peace and quiet to do this. So all you have to do, find that space where you're not going to be disturbed, and just visualize yourself on the start line. Imagine what it's going to be like. Not just looking at a two-dimensional picture here. I want you to jump right into this mind movie and imagine what it's going to be like. The sights, the sounds, the smells. Okay, well maybe not the smells, but certainly all the senses. Have a look at the sky. Hopefully it'll be a beautiful day like it is today. Look at your feet. Think about what you're going to be wearing. You should have a pretty good idea as to what you'll be wearing on race day by now. Try to create as much detail into this picture as possible. The gun goes. Visualize yourself crossing that start line and then mile by mile, chewing up the race, visualizing, thinking about how you're going to feel, the strength in your body, the confidence you're going to be feeling. This isn't a time to think about the runs that you've missed along the way. This is a time to think about all the training you've done, all the preparation you put in your marathon journey. Focus and really, really try to immerse yourself in it and visualize working through the race. You get to that finish line. Think about what that big old digital clock is going to say, that target time. And when I ran Cork last year, my target was to run in 2:59.59. Didn't care what else it was, just as long as it had a 2 in the front. I finished the race in 2:59.37. So I guess it doesn't really work that well, but I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't used these visualization techniques in the lead up to the race, there's no way I would have achieved my goal. They're powerful techniques and they're very, very easy to apply. You just need a little bit of imagination and, like I said, a bit of quiet space to practice them in. Now, we've all got our reasons for running the marathon tomorrow. For some of us, it's to raise money for charity. For others, it's to prove a point or to perhaps show what we're physically capable of to ourselves or to others. Some of us, it might just be the result of a drunken bet one Guinness-fueled night down at the pub 6 months ago, but there's a reason, and there's something that's driven you for the last few months, training, the dedication, the commitment, and the sacrifices that you've made. When you get to about mile 18 or 19 tomorrow, and that little voice in your head is going, hey, you know what, slow down, that pain will just go away. You've got to use this image of why you're running to overcome and to wash out these negative thoughts of doubt and of no self-belief. You've got to stay focused on what you believe you're capable of and push beyond where this sort of voice is telling you should be stopping. There may not be much more you can do physically to prepare for the run tomorrow. But certainly, if you invest just a small amount of time to fine-tune up here, then tomorrow you really will make the most of your marathon mindset and eke out those last few ounces of potential. Thank you so much for listening to me today. The very best of luck tomorrow.